Greetings, Alex and Curtis. This is Dr. Larry Asplund coming to you as promised. I wanted to be able to stop by this evening and just say a little bit about the full scope of Chapter 1. You've been working on the key ideas. The thesis statement is the target that you're aiming at, so having it worded very precisely and concisely with your topic clause and your claim clause is absolutely essential. And then on top of that, with that in mind, to do a review of the literature is huge. And in terms of space, the review of the literature takes up the bulk, certainly the majority of Chapter 1. But there are other shorter elements that are very, very important. And I want to be able to just unpack them so that you can begin to see the big picture. By the time we come to the end of this semester, our hope is that you will have at least a very good draft of Chapter 1 prepared to go forward into 699 next semester. So the thesis prospectus is really another way of saying the proposal. We don't do a separate prospectus anymore because we anticipate and have always anticipated that prospectus will become Chapter 1. So I would rather introduce it to you as Chapter 1, the preliminary Chapter 1, the tentative Chapter 1, what we hope will become Chapter 1 with just maybe some minor tweaking along the way. And so that has everything to do with Modules 3 and 4, which is where we are right now. The Chapter 1 is called the Overview of the Study, and it involves several very, very important elements. So I want to take some time just to discuss those specific elements. They're not large documents like you have in the review of the literature, which tends to be, 8 to 12 pages long. They're shorter than that, but very, very important. You start out with the abstract, which actually occurs before the official start of Chapter 1, because the abstract is always kind of there at the beginning of academic writing. So your abstract will be a one-paragraph expansion of the thesis statement, no more than 150 words. So it's not a long document. It ends up being on its own page before you actually get into the content of Chapter 1. And so you'll want to be thinking in terms of your thesis statement, how can you expand that in a helpful way to describe in 150 words or less, your one paragraph, what it is that you propose to be doing in your master's thesis. Then when you jump into Chapter 1 itself, there is an introduction section, which is simply the overall introduction to Chapter 1, and that's not long. It's usually a paragraph. Then you have another short section called the Statement and Significance of the Problem, where you identify the topic and you amplify on the issues surrounding the problem. So you want to kind of frame in the issue as you see it, the issue that will be specifically defined in your thesis statement. So it's important to say, okay, why do you think this is a significant issue for you to be spending your time researching and writing about? And then the next section is the scope and limits of the study, and that is what the thesis will address and what it will not address. So you're drawing boundaries, in a sense, limits around your research and around the master's thesis chapters that you will be writing. And so it's very important for someone reading your master's thesis, they want to know, is this a reasonable expectation that the author can do this? Is it are the limitations carefully defined enough so that he's not going to just go off on on a rabbit trail or whatever? He's going to keep himself very focused on the limits of the study. And then, of course, there is the thesis statement, which appears under its own heading. I think it's very important for anyone reading your master's thesis ultimately to not have to look around for your thesis statement. It should be very, very clear and obvious in Chapter 1. And then the big document, the review of the literature, which, as you know, is a report of all relevant research in some kind of logical order. So you're going to outline your notes, your outline will be reflected in subheadings under the review of the literature. And you're just establishing that you've got enough information, you've done enough research in the literature to be able to do what you say you are going to do. And so that's the big piece of Chapter 1. And then finally, you will have a section called the Overview of the Chapters, which is the outline of your proposed thesis chapters. You want to begin to kind of think about, okay, when I start to structure my master's thesis, how will I start to argue in support of the thesis statement? What will I do in chapter 2? How will I support my thesis statement then in chapter 3, etc.? So you are beginning to anticipate those outlines, and you will do that just with a couple of sentences each anticipated chapter in this section called the Overview of the Chapters. So you're going to support your claim ultimately in the chapters of your master's thesis with evidence from the literature, including, of course, the Bible, Christian theology, and church history, because this is a seminary master's thesis. But sometimes there are also other research areas in the literature that you find helpful and meaningful. We would sometimes call that cross-disciplinary items in the literature that are relevant to what it is you want to do. And so you're going to begin to think about how you want to dive in and structure those chapters in support of the claim you made in your thesis statement. Then a final section, the summary, which just summarizes chapter 1 briefly, maybe just a couple of paragraphs. And finally, the bibliography. Now, this is a working bibliography. At this point in time, you are literally going to be thinking in terms of a works cited page, as in MLA or APA. We're calling it a bibliography, which is it only references items that you cited in the body of chapter 1. So it's a chapter 1 bibliography. Ultimately, we may ask you to provide at the very end of it all a bibliography that cites everything that you found relevant and took some notes on. But for our purposes, this is basically your chapter 1 bibliography. When we go to structure the master's thesis, it won't be there. You will just have one overall bibliography at the end of your master's thesis. So there are some very important resources that you definitely want to pay attention to as you begin to fill out the items of your chapter 1, especially in the master's thesis manual. Section 6 is all about organizing the master's thesis, the various pieces of the thesis. Section 7 on formatting the master's thesis, what that's going to end up looking like. Section 8, writing the master's thesis, so some helpful guidelines there. And then there's an important appendix. In the appendix, you have the master's thesis template annotated. So that is to say there are notes added to what is normally to be found in chapter 1 in a template. And so that's going to be very helpful as you begin to compose these sections. But also there's available to you in course resources the master's thesis template that is blank. So you literally can compose the elements of your chapter 1 in this template, or you can compose those elements somewhere else and copy and paste them into the template. The template is already set up. It's formatted with the Microsoft Word appropriately. It's formatted with Turabian guidelines in mind, etc. And so this template is going to save you a lot of time. So you want to be able to download that and be ready to use it. Also, I've given you some chapter 1 samples. Now again, these are not examples, they're samples. So you want to be able to take a look at that and see what a good chapter 1 might look like. And this may be helpful for you as well. So the introduction, which is really chapter 1 to your master's thesis, is so very, very important. Certainly anybody reading your master's thesis is going to want to have a clear sense by the time they're done with chapter 1 of what it is that you plan on doing and how you're going to do it. And so it's, although the review of the literature is the big piece, the thesis statement is absolutely essential. These other items are also very, very important going forward. So as always, I'm here to serve you. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm only a phone call away. We can do whatever we need to do to make sure you've got clarity and a sense of focus going forward when it comes just to this very first chapter of your thesis statement. And that will ultimately lead us to $6.99, and the writing of those other chapters, starting with chapter 2 next semester. So a little bit of extra information for you I thought might be helpful to keep you moving in the right direction. In the meantime, I pray that the Lord will just give you grace and favor and spiritual focus and mental focus as you continue to go forward in this project. God bless you guys. Have a great week.